It all started on a bright Saturday morning when I was down at the marina checking on my yacht. I call it the Liberty. I had it docked there for months while I traveled overseas for business. When I came back, the thing that shocked me wasn't the seagulls sitting on the rails or the dust on the deck. It was the banner hanging off the side that said "Welcome to Karen's HOA Summer Bash." I stood there for a second thinking maybe I had walked into the wrong dock, but no, it was definitely my yacht, the Liberty. Same name, same paint job, same private dock space I paid for myself. There were caterers loading trays of food, expensive champagne crates, and a full band setting up speakers on the back deck. They looked at me like I was just another worker passing by. I asked one of them who booked this event, and he said Mrs. Karen from the Oak Ridge HOA. That name hit me fast. Karen, the same HOA president who lived in one of my rental properties, the same woman who once fined my tenant for leaving his trash bin out for an extra hour, the same Karen who sent a letter telling me to repaint my house even though it wasn't even under HOA authority. I asked the guy where Karen was. He pointed toward the end of the dock where she stood in a floral dress barking orders at the event planners like she owned the ocean itself. I walked up to her, calm, steady. She didn't even notice me at first. She was too busy checking off her clipboard telling the bartender to make sure all 100 guests got their custom printed champagne flutes with HOA logos on them. Then she finally turned around, looked at me and said, "Can you please move those boxes? I don't want them ruining the photo backdrop." I smiled and said, "Sure, but before I move anything, maybe you should tell me what you're doing on my yacht." She frowned. "My yacht? This yacht belongs to the marina," she said confidently. "I booked it for the HOA summer event weeks ago. I paid the full deposit and I have the confirmation right here." She pulled out her phone, waving a fake-looking PDF receipt. I laughed quietly. She thought she had pulled off something clever. I told her, "Karen, I think there's been a mistake. This yacht isn't for rent. It's privately owned and the owner happens to be standing right in front of you." Her face dropped for half a second before she snapped back with that classic HOA attitude. "No, this can't be right," she said. "I confirmed with the marina manager myself. He said the owner approved it." I asked her the name on that contract and she said something like Mr. H. Cole. That's when I really started laughing. "My full name is Henry Cole." She blinked. I could tell her brain was scrambling trying to piece together what she had just said. Then she tried to recover fast. She said, "Well, that's impossible. You can't just show up and claim ownership. I've already paid for this event and my guests are on their way." I told her, "Karen, this is my yacht. It's registered under my company. I've got the paperwork right inside. The funny thing is you didn't just trespass, you organized a 100-person party on private property." She tried to argue, saying I couldn't just kick her off because she had a signed event contract. I told her, "Fine, let's call the marina manager right now." She agreed, thinking she was about to prove me wrong. The manager came down looking nervous. He saw me and immediately said, "Oh, Mr. Cole, you're back early. I didn't expect you until next week." Karen's face went pale. She stammered, "You know him?" And the manager said, "Of course, that's Henry Cole. He owns half the docks here." Now she couldn't even look me in the eye. She tried to fake a smile and said, "Oh, Mr. Cole, I didn't realize it was you. I thought maybe it was a shared charter misunderstanding." I said, "No misunderstanding. You used my yacht without permission. That's not just rude, it's illegal." She started panicking quietly but tried to hold her composure. She said, "Well, my guests are already arriving. We can't just cancel now. Think of the embarrassment to the HOA." I said, "Don't worry, I'm thinking about it, but I'm also thinking about trespassing and property misuse, maybe even fraud if you forged that confirmation document." She swallowed hard. I could tell she didn't expect this to blow up so fast. She begged me to let the party continue for at least an hour. She said she would compensate me later. I told her I wasn't running a rental business and that this yacht wasn't available for her HOA circus. That's when she snapped. She said loudly in front of everyone, "You can't talk to me like that. I'm the HOA president. I run the neighborhood." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You run the HOA, Karen, but I own the house you live in." Her entire expression froze. She blinked like she didn't hear me right. She said, "Excuse me." I said it again slowly. "You rent your home through Oak Ridge Property Management. That company belongs to me, which means your landlord is standing right here." The caterers, the staff, even the marina workers all turned silent. The sound of waves against the dock was the only thing moving. Her entire confidence melted away right there. You could see her mentally rewinding through all those arrogant emails and those late rent notices she probably ignored. She said, "That can't be true. I have a lease agreement with Oak Ridge." I said, "Exactly, and Oak Ridge is my holding company. You've been renting from me for over 2 years. Now she looked like she wanted to disappear. I said, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to cancel this party. You're going to remove every banner, every decoration, and you're going to issue refunds to everyone who paid. You're also going to cover the cleaning and dock fees for the trouble." She tried one last desperate move. She said, "Please, my guests are already walking down the dock. You'll make me look bad in front of everyone." I said, "Karen, you did that yourself when you booked a yacht that wasn't yours." As the guests started arriving in their summer outfits, they looked confused seeing Karen arguing with me. One of them asked, "Are we still boarding?" She forced a fake smile and said, "There's been a small scheduling issue." I told the band and staff to pack up. The manager helped escort everyone off the yacht. Karen was fuming, but she couldn't do anything. She just stood there clutching her clipboard like it was going to save her. As everyone left, she came closer and said quietly, "You'll regret this. I'll make sure the HOA takes action against you." I laughed again and said, "Karen, maybe you forgot I own property in your HOA. Your actions are the ones under review, not mine." Later that evening I sat inside my yacht watching the sun dip below the horizon. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA board apologizing for Karen's behavior. Apparently she hadn't even told them she was throwing the event in the first place. They said they were going to hold an emergency meeting to discuss her future as HOA president. That was the cherry on top. I didn't even have to lift a finger. But I wasn't done yet. I had a bigger plan, because if Karen thought she could misuse my yacht, wait till she saw what was coming next. I had just reviewed her lease agreement, and there was one clause she clearly never read, the clause that said tenants must notify the owner before hosting any event exceeding 20 guests on the premises or they risk immediate termination. And that clause wasn't limited to her house, it applied to any property event she organized under her residency. She had just violated that clause in writing with her own digital receipts. The next morning I drove down to her neighborhood. She was outside yelling at a landscaper about trimming bushes an inch too short. When she saw my car she froze again, trying to act normal. I walked up, smiled, and handed her a notice envelope. She asked, "What's this?" I said, "That's your 30-day notice of termination of lease, effective immediately for violation of property terms." Her jaw dropped. She said, "You can't evict me. I've lived here for years." I told her, "Karen, I can, and I just did. You hosted an unauthorized event under your lease terms on private property. You forged a document and used my yacht without permission." She tried to argue, saying she'd call a lawyer. I told her to go ahead because I had photos, video evidence, and witness statements. She went silent again. Her husband came outside asking what was going on. I explained everything. He looked at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. She tried to play victim, saying I was overreacting, but he cut her off, saying, "Karen, what did you do this time?" She stormed inside, slamming the door. Meanwhile, I got in my car and left, knowing full well that her reign as HOA queen was about to crumble. Later that week I got another email from the HOA board. They had voted unanimously to remove her from the presidency for misuse of association resources and unauthorized event spending. And just like that, the woman who tried to take over my yacht and act like she owned the neighborhood was now jobless, homeless, and reputation ruined. But I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it because people like Karen never learn until someone stands up to them, someone who knows how the system works better than they do. I leaned back on the deck of the Liberty a week later, watching the calm waves and the empty dock. I smiled, knowing I had handled it the right way. But little did I know Karen wasn't done yet, because the following week a strange letter arrived in my mailbox with no return address. It was a formal complaint filed against me for property harassment, signed by none other than Karen herself. That's where things started to get interesting again. The letter sat on my desk for almost an hour before I opened it. It was written on official HOA letterhead, the kind with gold embossing and fancy borders, like they were running a government office instead of a suburban neighborhood. The words jumped out at me the moment I read them: formal complaint for landlord misconduct and property intimidation filed by resident Mrs. Karen Thompson. I almost laughed. She had been evicted legally and removed from her HOA position, yet somehow she found a way to keep fighting. I knew Karen wouldn't go down quietly, but filing a fake complaint under the same HOA that just voted her out, that was bold even for her. I took the letter straight to my attorney. I had learned long ago that when dealing with people like Karen, you don't argue emotionally, you move with documents, dates, and evidence. My lawyer Michael looked at the papers, read through them, and shook his head. He said, "Henry, this isn't even a valid complaint. The HOA can't legally file harassment claims for individual tenant matters, and she's no longer a member of the board." That made sense, but Karen wasn't trying to win legally. She was trying to stir trouble publicly. She wanted noise, she wanted gossip, she wanted the neighbors to think I was some rich landlord throwing my power around. The next morning I drove back to the neighborhood. I still owned 3 rental homes there, including Karen's old place, which was now officially on the market. I could already feel eyes on me as I parked in front of the HOA office. A few residents whispered from their lawns. The story had clearly spread faster than I expected. Inside the office, the new interim president, a polite older man named Howard, greeted me nervously. He said, "Mr. Cole, we're aware of the complaint. Mrs. Thompson dropped it off personally last night. We didn't authorize it. We're sorry for the confusion." I said, "No harm done, Howard, but I'd like to clear my name officially. I'm not letting false claims sit unanswered." He nodded and said he'd schedule a public HOA meeting that weekend to address the issue transparently. When I stepped outside, guess who was standing across the parking lot? Karen. She had her arms folded, wearing sunglasses like she was a celebrity trying to dodge paparazzi. She smiled that fake tight smile and said, "Oh, Henry, didn't expect to see you here so soon." I said, "Karen, I could say the same about you. You're not even on the HOA board anymore." She said, "Oh, I'm still part of the community. I have every right to protect its reputation." I said, "By spreading lies." She said, "By exposing corruption." I took a deep breath. She wanted me angry. I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. I said, "Karen, we'll settle this publicly. I have nothing to hide." She laughed and said, "We'll see about that, Henry. Maybe the HOA should know what kind of landlord you really are." I got back in my car and left. She stayed there standing tall as if she had won something, but she hadn't. She had no idea what was coming. That weekend the HOA meeting was packed. More than 50 residents showed up. I stood near the front while Howard called the meeting to order. Karen strutted in, wearing a bright red dress, making sure everyone saw her. She carried a thick binder like she had been preparing a courtroom case. Howard began calmly, "We're here to address the complaint filed by former HOA President Mrs. Karen Thompson against property owner Mr. Henry Cole. Mrs. Thompson, you may speak first." Karen stood up and launched into a speech about fairness, power abuse, and community respect. She painted herself as a victim, saying, "I only wanted to organize a simple summer celebration for our residents, and Mr. Cole used his wealth to humiliate me in public." She claimed I yelled at her in front of guests, which I hadn't. She said I used eviction as a personal weapon. People were whispering, some nodded, others rolled their eyes. She was good at playing innocent when it suited her. She wrapped up by saying, "I just want justice, and I think Mr. Cole owes the HOA and this community an apology." Howard turned to me and said, "Mr. Cole, your response." I stood up slow and steady. Everyone quieted down. I said, "Thank you, Howard, and thank you everyone here. I won't take much of your time. I only want to share the truth." I walked them through everything from the yacht booking to the fake receipt. I told them about how the marina manager confirmed ownership and how Karen forged a reservation document. Then I pulled out the printed evidence, the lease clause, the event photos, the text exchanges, and the marina witness statement. The room got quieter with every page I handed out. Karen started interrupting, saying, "That's not true, that's taken out of context," but every time she spoke the document said otherwise. Finally I ended with this. I said, "I don't like confrontation, but I also don't tolerate lies. Mrs. Thompson trespassed on my property, organized a party for 100 people, and tried to use my yacht as her personal stage. When I stopped her, she retaliated with false claims, and now she's wasting your time with another one." Howard looked through the evidence and sighed. He said, "Mrs. Thompson, these records are legitimate. Do you deny forging the booking confirmation?" She froze for a second, then said, "I didn't forge anything. I just reused an old template." Howard said, "That's still forgery, Karen." The room murmured. One woman in the back whispered, "I knew she was lying." Howard announced, "The HOA board officially dismisses the complaint effective immediately. Mrs. Thompson will also be discussing further action regarding misuse of HOA documents." Karen looked around, realizing she had lost completely. She grabbed her binder, stormed out without another word. The door slammed so hard it echoed across the hall. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me apologizing for believing her. Some even thanked me for standing up to her. They said she'd been terrorizing the community for years, issuing fines and bullying homeowners. I just smiled and said, "Maybe now things can finally be peaceful again." But peace and Karen never went together. 3 days later I got a call from Michael, my lawyer. He said, "Henry, you're not going to believe this. Karen just filed a case in small claims court. She's suing you for emotional distress and property damage from that yacht incident." I actually laughed out loud. Property damage? The only thing damaged was her ego. He said, "Don't worry, we'll handle it. Just show up with the same evidence." I said, "Fine, let's do it." The court date came 2 weeks later. It was a small local courtroom. The judge looked bored already from the stack of petty disputes. That day Karen was there again, all dressed up with her binder. She didn't have a lawyer. She wanted attention, not justice. She told her story again, twisting every detail, saying I humiliated her in front of 100 guests, causing her public embarrassment and psychological stress. She even claimed my staff yelled at her. When it was my turn, I stayed calm. I told the judge the facts, showed him the ownership documents, the forged email chain, and the eviction notice. The judge flipped through everything and said, "Mrs. Thompson, did you or did you not book this yacht without permission?" She said, "I thought it was available." He said, "That's not an answer. Did you have permission?" She stayed quiet. He said, "Then the case is dismissed." He looked at me and said, "Mr. Cole, I suggest you block any further contact from this individual." Karen left red-faced. She wouldn't even look my way. That should have been the end of it, but when you deal with people like Karen, there's always one last desperate move. A week later my property manager called and said, "Henry, you need to come see this. It's urgent." I drove to the neighborhood again, and when I got there I couldn't believe it. Karen was standing on the lawn of her old rental house with a camera crew. Yes, an actual local news crew. She was giving an interview about evil landlords and corrupt homeowners associations. I stood at the edge of the driveway watching her rant on camera, saying phrases like unjust eviction and property tyranny. The reporter noticed me and came over asking for a comment. I said, "Sure, but make sure you get the facts straight." I told him the full story again, showing the court documents and dismissal papers. He nodded slowly, looking uncomfortable as he realized the story she sold them wasn't real. When the report aired that night, the headline read, "Former HOA President Caught in False Complaint Scandal." Not exactly the heroic image Karen wanted. That broke her final defense. People saw the truth on screen. She became a neighborhood cautionary tale. Within days she moved out of town quietly. But the story didn't end there. I later found out that after leaving she tried joining another HOA community a few cities away, and within a month that HOA reached out to me asking if I could verify her history. I simply sent them a polite email with all public documents attached and a note saying best of luck. After that I didn't hear from her again for months. Life went back to normal. The marina was calm, the neighborhood was peaceful, and my yacht finally felt like mine again. But deep down I knew people like Karen never really disappear. They wait, they plot, and when they think the world has forgotten, they strike again. One evening while I was out on the Liberty watching the sunset, a small envelope slid under my cabin door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single line written on a piece of paper: "You may own the house but not the last word." I stared at it for a while, half amused, half cautious. Maybe it was her, maybe it was someone else inspired by her antics. Either way, I smiled, leaned back, and whispered to myself, let them try. Because if there's one thing I learned through all this, it's that power isn't about yelling the loudest or showing off at HOA meetings. It's about staying calm, collecting facts, and letting people dig their own hole. And Karen, well, she had dug hers deep. But what I didn't expect was that the next twist in this story would come not from Karen but from someone even closer to her, someone who had just inherited her anger and wasn't afraid to use it. That's when I learned Karen had a sister, and she had just moved into another one of my rental homes. I thought the storm was finally over. I thought Karen had packed up her chaos and left for good, but life has a funny way of keeping drama alive just when you start to relax. It all started a few months after the news segment aired. I had gone back to focusing on my real estate business, enjoying some quiet time at the marina, when my property manager called again. He said, Henry, the first, no, you're going to think this is a joke, but you need to come by one of your rental houses, the one Karen used to live in. I drove over thinking maybe it was a new tenant issue or a maintenance request. When I pulled up, the first thing I noticed was the yard. It was perfect, freshly cut, the hedges shaped into neat little arches, and the flowers trimmed just right, too perfect. It looked exactly how Karen used to keep it when she wanted to impress the HOA board. A woman stepped out of the front door wearing sunglasses and holding a clipboard. Deja vu hit me hard. She looked similar to Karen, maybe a few years younger, same posture, same attitude. I introduced myself and she smiled politely, saying, you must be Mr. Cole. I'm Sarah Thompson, Karen's sister. That name alone told me everything I needed to know. The resemblance wasn't just physical, it was in her tone, in her smirk, in the way she looked at the house like she already owned it. I said, so you're Karen's sister? I didn't realize she had family moving in. She said, oh yes, Karen helped me find this place before she left town. I'm so glad to be part of this community. I heard so many stories about you, Mr. Cole. I raised an eyebrow and said, I bet you did. She laughed a little too sweetly, saying, don't worry, I like to make up my own mind about people. I wanted to believe her, I really did. Maybe she was nothing like Karen, maybe she just needed a fresh start. So I welcomed her and reminded her of the lease terms. She nodded, agreeing to everything, smiling the whole time. For the first few weeks everything seemed fine. Rent was paid on time, the house was spotless, the neighbors even said she was polite. But then little things started happening. The HOA president Howard called me, saying, Mr. Cole, I'm getting some strange complaints again. This new tenant Sarah, she's been showing up to HOA meetings asking questions about property rules and enforcement budgets, and she's been requesting access to old meeting notes about Karen. I sighed deeply. It was starting all over again. I told Howard to stay professional but to keep me informed. A week later my marina manager called. He said, Henry, the first, don't know how to say this, but someone's been asking about your yacht again. A woman named Sarah came by asking if the Liberty was available for charter for a charity event. I almost dropped my phone. I said, did she say her last name? He said, yes, Thompson. She said she's organizing a fundraiser for the Oak Ridge Neighborhood Association. It was like Karen had returned through her sister, this time under a new excuse and a new game plan. I drove to the marina the next morning, and sure enough, there she was standing at the dock talking to the same event planner who had worked with Karen months before. She saw me and waved like nothing was wrong. I said, Sarah, can we talk for a second? She smiled, of course. We walked over to the side and I said, I heard you're planning a charity event. She said, yes, I thought it would be nice to bring the community together after all the drama last time, and I wanted to do something positive in Karen's memory. In her memory? I asked, confused. She said, oh, she didn't pass away, she just moved on from all this nonsense, but people here still talk about her, so I wanted to turn the bad energy into something good. I said, I appreciate that, but why are you trying to book my yacht? She said, oh, I thought it would be symbolic to show that there's no hard feelings between our families, plus it's the perfect venue for a community event. I stared at her, wondering if this was naivety or manipulation. She had charm, something Karen never had, but I could tell she knew exactly what she was doing. She was testing boundaries the same way her sister did. I told her politely, the Liberty isn't available for any public event or HOA function ever again. It's private property and I don't rent it out. She nodded slowly, still smiling, and said, I understand completely, Mr. Cole, thank you for clarifying. She left calmly, but I could feel it. That same energy Karen carried was right behind her. Over the next few weeks small rumors started spreading again. People whispered that I was still bitter about the HOA incident, that I held grudges against tenants, that I abused my ownership power. It was subtle, but I knew where it came from. Sarah was planting seeds. Then one morning I got an email from her. It read, Dear Mr. Cole, I wanted to formally request permission to use the backyard for a small neighborhood tea gathering, no more than 20 people. I promise it won't be a repeat of what happened before. Now the smart thing would have been to say no immediately, but part of me wanted to see what she'd do if I said yes, so I replied, sure, as long as it stays small and under 20 people. The day of the event I drove by discreetly to check it out, and of course it wasn't a tea party, it was a full-blown networking event with tents, tables, catering, and easily 50 guests. She even had a banner reading, Welcome to Oak Ridge Renewal Brunch. I parked nearby and walked up silently. She was giving a speech about community leadership and how important it was to rebuild trust after what she called the unfortunate misunderstandings caused by her sister. She said some landlords just don't understand what it means to be part of a family neighborhood. Everyone clapped. She hadn't seen me yet. When she finally noticed me standing at the edge of the crowd, her voice cracked mid-sentence. She said, "Oh everyone, this is Mr. Cole, the owner of this beautiful home." All eyes turned to me. I walked forward, slow, calm. I said, "Nice event, Sarah. Looks like a lot more than 20 people though." She tried to laugh it off, saying, "Oh, some extra guests just stopped by. You know how these things grow naturally." I said, "Yes, I do. That's why I put that limit in the lease agreement." Her smile faded a bit. She said, "Well, we're almost done anyway." I said, "No, you're done right now." People started whispering. She tried to save face, saying, "Mr. Cole, maybe we can talk privately," but I wasn't interested in another repeat of history. I said, "Everyone here, I appreciate your time, but this event is unauthorized and must end immediately. This property is private and the tenant has violated her lease terms." Some people left quietly, others looked confused. Sarah looked furious but trapped. She whispered through her teeth, "You're making a scene." I said, "No, I'm making a point." The crowd dispersed within 10 minutes. She stood there glaring at me. I said, "Sarah, you're walking the same path your sister did." She said, "My sister was right about you. You think owning property makes you superior, but you can't own respect." I said, "Respect is earned, not demanded," with fake smiles. I gave her an official notice the next day for lease violation. She called crying, saying it was a misunderstanding, but I didn't buy it. My lawyer filed it formally. That week, Howard, the HOA president, reached out again, saying, "Henry, the first thing, Sarah's been trying to campaign for a board position. She wants to reinstate some of Karen's old policies. She's charming some of the members." I laughed and said, "Let her try, because this time I'm ready." Sure enough, at the next HOA election meeting, she stood up giving a speech about restoring fairness and communication. She spoke well, confident, like she had rehearsed it for months. She said, "We need leaders who stand up for residents, not landlords who treat us like tenants." I stood in the back watching quietly until she finished. Then I asked the board if I could address the members. I said, "I'm not running for any position. I just want to share some facts." I told them who she was: Karen's sister, the eviction record, the lease violations, the unauthorized events. I presented the evidence just like before. The room went silent. Howard thanked me and said, "We've heard enough. Voting results are final and Mrs. Thompson will not be joining the board." Sarah looked shocked. Her whole confident facade cracked right there. She packed up and left before the meeting even ended. The next morning I found a note taped to the front door of my marina office. It said, "You win again, but you'll never silence us." The handwriting looked identical to the note I got months ago from Karen. That confirmed it. The sisters were working together. She hadn't left, she'd just relocated her fight. I took the note to Michael, my lawyer. He said, "Henry, at this point it's harassment. We can file a restraining order." I said, "Not yet. I want to handle this quietly." So I decided to play the long game. I stopped responding to her completely. No replies, no confrontation. I made sure everything went through legal channels and paperwork. Only silence can be the loudest answer sometimes. A few weeks passed. The house went up for rent again. Sarah left the community, moving out in the middle of the night without saying goodbye. But something interesting happened after she was gone. Howard and the rest of the board reached out to me. They said, "Mr. Cole, we've realized we need to revisit how we handle HOA leadership. We'd like your input as a property owner and community investor." That was unexpected, but I agreed, not because I wanted control but because I wanted stability. Over time the neighborhood transformed. The drama faded. People actually started trusting each other again. The fines disappeared. The meetings were peaceful, and the HOA finally acted like what it was supposed to be: a group of neighbors, not a personal kingdom. Months later I was back on the Liberty, anchored out on open water, when I got a message from Howard. He said, "Thought you'd want to know, Karen's house has been sold. Someone new is moving in next week." I smiled and replied, "Let's hope this one just likes quiet mornings and coffee on the porch." The wind was calm that evening. I leaned against the railing watching the sunset over the ocean. The waves were soft. The world finally felt peaceful. Sometimes I think about Karen and Sarah. I wonder if they ever realized what their battles were really about. It was never about yachts or houses or power. It was about control and the illusion of importance. They thought titles made them untouchable, but in the end truth and patience always win. I poured myself a drink and looked at the horizon, thinking how funny it all was. A story that started with a stolen yacht booking had ended with two sisters outsmarted by their own pride. As the sky turned orange, I whispered quietly to myself, "Lesson learned: never underestimate a Karen, but never underestimate calm either, because calm always wins." The Liberty rocked gently beneath me. The sun dipped lower, and for the first time in a long time everything felt exactly how it should be. The world was finally quiet again, and that's how it all went down. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good twist. See you in the next one.